I'm Al Korelin. You already know that, though, being listeners of the Korelin Economics Report. We are branching out and doing a little more diversification, actually not necessarily for our benefit, but for your benefits. We are doing interviews now with some of the folks who I think are the most brilliant minds in our industry. And our first interview is with a gentleman by the name of Marin Katusa. Marin is perhaps one of the brightest guys I've met in a long time. He's involved, no offense to Marin when I say this, but he is involved with a group of people who I think are absolutely insane, and that happens to be the Casey Group. I'm not sure how you fit in with them, but with Louie and Doug and the rest of those guys, I mean, how do you put up with those people?
They're very smart guys.
They're probably the smartest people in the world. There's no question about it. Marin, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Casey, if you would, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I run the energy side of Casey Research and partnered up with Dr. Buston, who's a very well-known name. He's a professor at the university. My background is mathematics, so together I take care of the numbers. Dr. Buston takes care of the geology.
Now, before you joined Casey, if I'm not mistaken, you were a calculus teacher at Simon Fraser University.
That's right. I would teach the review sessions for Calculus 1, 2, and 3.
Interesting, interesting. Now, I'm curious about one thing, Marin. You are basically the energy expert for Casey, okay? What do you think, for example, about if I would tell you that I think one of the most undervalued areas of the resource industry is that area that consisting of coal mining? Well, would you agree with me or disagree with me?
I think you're absolutely correct.
Totally overlooked. I
think you're completely correct. Today, Xstrata announced a 38% increase in their thermal coal contracts. It went from roughly $70 to $98 US per ton. That is significant news. That's the equivalent of gold going from 1,100 to over 1,400 in one day.
Interesting. What do you see as the future for coal? I mean, there are a number of publicly traded coal mining companies out there.
Well, for example,
highly undervalued.
In North America, there's over 73 public companies that have assets, whether in thermal coal or metallurgical coal. Met coal always gets a premium to thermal coal. If you have a thermal coal project in North America, as an investor, unless you have distribution to Asia, like an offtake agreement or something, you're going to have a tough time. If you have a met coal, over 90% of all steel production is dependent on met coal. So if you have a project in North America, you want to be met coal. So for your viewers, that's something really important. And I see very, very bullish times ahead for met coal.
You know, in terms of picking up the slack in terms of the energy sector, okay, you hear about peak oil, you hear about the various problems that are going on specifically in the United States right now with a lack of product. You hear about dependence on the Far East, et cetera, which I personally don't think is a good thing. Before we talk about oil and gas, let's stay with coal. How much of that void do you think the coal sector can fill?
Today, 50% of all the electricity capacity comes from coal. You're completely right, because USA is the Saudi Arabia of coal. So what Obama's got to realize that if he triples all of the alternative energy in USA, it'll only get to 7%. Okay, so that tells you right now how big coal is in North America. On top of that, when you talk about peak oil, of every 6 barrels of oil consumed in the United States of America, 1 barrel comes from the Canadian oil sands. So there is no real, I had lunch with T-Boone Pickens, and he's completely right. There is no reason why America should be dependent on foreign oil energy sources. You have the coal, you have the oil, you have the shale gas, you have it. Now Obama's got to see what's the right thing.
You know, speaking of President Obama, something that I find to be really interesting, he announced just a couple of days ago, not necessarily a couple of days ago as you're watching this, but a couple of days ago as we're taping this, back in late March, President Obama came out and said, you know what, offshore drilling's not such a bad idea. What are your comments on that?
You know,
he ran totally against it.
In 2008, on the front page of the Financial Times, Financial Post, they talk about how in 2008 he said, in my time, I intend not to see this happen. So like a politician, you know it's going to happen.
Right.
And these are high-cost wells. Okay, so it's for the big companies. Now, there's a lot of potential with the unconventional technologies. Now, for your viewers, 50% of the gas production in the States comes from unconventional sources, such as shale gas. So I think saying that they're opening it up, the business sector said, well, at these prices, it's not yet that convincing. Plus, with the administration going left and right, we're not convinced yet to put the money in offshore sources. But the Gulf of Mexico is something that we are looking at.
Oh, there's some big things going on down there. I have been chatting with Marin Katusa, a very interesting guy. It's a pleasure to have met him finally after hearing about him for all these years. Let me say one thing. Rest assured, this guy's going to be back on our radio show on a fairly regular basis because I like what he has to say, and I think it'll be of really significant value to you folks. Marin, thanks so much, buddy.
My pleasure.